All right, good morning. Our learning is Lila Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain, her neshama should have an aliyah. And we are on Tes Vav Amud Aleph and Gufa, the second word on Tes Vav Amud Aleph, Gufa. Whenever we say Gufa, that means we're going back to an earlier statement that was made in a previous discussion. So Gufa, we go back to an earlier statement. Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Yud Ches Gazru, Uva Yud Ches Nechleku. We had a statement saying that 18 decrees were made. Amen. We were still unpacking these 18 decrees that were made by Hillel and Shammai, and in that attic. And the way it was framed by Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says they 18 things were decreed and 18 things were argued about. Okay, so I would flip that. In other words, 18 things were argued about and 18 things were decreed. So the Gemara is going to challenge that because Vatanya, we have a brayso that says otherwise. It says Hushvu bo bayom. It says that no, they agreed about 18 things, right? So our tradition seems to say, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel seems to say they argued about these 18 things before decreeing it, and yet we have this brayso which says they agreed about these 18 things and then made this decree. So what's going on? So the Gemara says, no, nechleku ulamachar hushvu. One day they spent up in the attic and they argued vehemently. Next day they all came to an agreement. Okay, sometimes it happens, you disagree. They slept on it. The next day, they all agreed. They said, you know what? This is actually the right thing, and that's what actually happened. Okay, so the Gemara is just trying to establish the facts in terms of what the progression was. And so those 18 things, first they were debated about between Hillel and Shammai, and then the next day, they all agreed that this, whatever, that the 18 decrees were appropriate. They all agreed to go in the same direction. Okay, now we're going to go back to another statement that was mentioned on Daf Yudal, Gufa. Amar Rabbi Huna, begimel mikomos nechleku Shammai v'Hillel. We saw earlier that Rav Huna taught us that there were 3 places that Shammai and Hillel argued. And the Gemara is going to discuss, is that really true? But before we do so, first it's going to tell us what those 3 areas that Shammai and Hillel, again, there's this misconception, Shammai and Hillel argued so much. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued a lot. Shammai and Hillel, the 2 teachers, they only argued in 3 places. What are those 3 places? One is about being mafresh challah. Okay, we have halacha that when a certain amount of bread is baked, then you have an obligation to separate challah. The question is how much bread is made. This is based on a discussion, based on a debate. What we're about to see is based on a debate about what the pasuk means when it speaks about the amount of bread. The Torah tells us the amount of bread that's needed. Discussion about how to calculate that amount of bread. And so here are the different opinions. Shammai Omer mikav challah, that it's only when you have a kav of flour, that's when you have an obligation of challah. How much is a kav? A kav is approximately equivalent to 24 eggs. Okay, so think of 24 eggs worth of challah, of flour. That's when you have to be mafresh challah. The Hillel Omer mikabayim. Hillel says, no, 2 times that amount, meaning 48 eggs worth of flour, that's when you have to be mafresh challah. The Chachamim omrim lo kedivrei zeh v'lo kedivrei zeh ela kav umechza chaya b'challah. It's a kav and a half. Okay, their understanding is based on somewhere in the middle between both Hillel and Shammai, and they say it's 1.5 kavin. That's when you have to be mafresh challah. Then the Gemara tells us a little bit of a historic / measurement little background. Mishigdilu hamidos. Okay, so basically, as time went on, the measurements changed. Just like nowadays, you'd say $1 is worth less or more, less than it was back in the day. So similarly, when you had measurements back in the day, when they, at one point in history, they changed what each measurement was worth. So for example, 1.5 kavin is equivalent to 6 lugin. We're not going to do a whole measurement thing. You have a chart there in the article. For those using article, I don't like numbers, so I'm just going to keep it simple over here. Bottom line is that 1.5 kavin, which is the Chachamim's measurements, is equivalent to 6 lugin. But when the measurements got bigger, meaning each lug is now worth more, then Amru Chameshes Revaim Kamach Chayav Mechala. They said 5 Revaim. Revaim is the word for a lug. Now it's 5 lugin. Historically it was 6 lugin. Now it's 5 lugin. It's actually the same amount of eggs. But the point is that each lug is now worth more. So historically it was 6 lugin. Okay, and then it became 5 lugin because the measurements became larger. Bottom line is, we're saying this is the opinion of the Chachamim, which is 1.5 kabin of flour make you chayiv in challah. One more opinion though, Rav Yossi Omer, hey peturin, hey ve'od chayavin. He says, no, it's not 5 lugin which are chayiv in, which are chayiv, which is what the Chachamim said, but rather when you have exactly 5, you're patur. It's when you have a little bit more, you're chayav. Rav Yossi has a general opinion. Whenever the Chachamim give a measurement by eggs, it's not a precise measurement. It means like 5 loose eggs. In other words, don't measure it exact. Rather, it means like overflowing, right? Some of the overflowing measurements, it's meant to be overflowing measurements when it comes to eggs. And therefore, Rav Yossi is of the opinion that although he agrees with the Chachamim that it's 5 lugin, okay, which is 1.5 kabin, okay, but that doesn't mean an exact measurement. It means a little bit more, and therefore, if you have a little bit more than 5 lugin of flour, then you are chayiv in challah. If it's a little bit less, then you are. If it's exact, then you are pater. Bottom line is, how do we paskin? We paskin like the Chachamim, which is 1.5 kavim, which is 6 lugin in the original measurements, which is 5 lugin in the new measurements. Practically, what is this? Practically speaking, if a person makes challah with anything more than 2.6 pounds of flour, which is roughly half a typical bag of flour, then you should be mafresh challah, but we don't do it with a bracha because it's not so clear if that's the right amount. But everyone agrees once you hit 4.95, meaning if you use a full bag of flour, bottom line is like a full bag of flour, like I think most bags are 5 pounds, right? 5 pounds of flour, then you are mafresh challah with a bracha. But if you use half a bag, you should still be mafresh challah, but you do not make a bracha at that point, okay? That is one of the places Hillel and Shammai disagree. We happen to not rule like either of them, but this is one of the places they disagree. Okay, that's one. Let's find 2 more. V'idach. Another one is about a mikvah. Let's just discuss briefly a mikvah. A mikvah, there to make a kosher mikvah, you need 40 sa'in of water that is not drawn. Okay, the complexity of a mikvah is the fact it's not just the tiling, the making it beautiful. The complexity of a mikvah is trying to make sure that you have water that is not mayim shuva, not drawn water, not pipe water, but rather water that falls directly from the sky. Okay, so in every mikvah, if you were to do a little tour of a mikvah, you would know that in the middle of the mikvah there is what they call the bar, where you have the water which is mikvah water, which is legit mikvah water, and that's sitting in the middle, and then there's little pipes which connect the water that is legitimate mikvah water to the boros, whatever. It's the different pools of water that are taken from like a pipe. Okay, so in other words, when you go into a mikvah, that is not the water that's attached to water, which is like quote-unquote real full-fledged mikvah water, which is there first, which is a certain measurements of water. Everything has to be attached to that water. Okay, that's the complexity of getting that water there, which is not so simple, and then attaching it properly with like a little pipe to the water that you actually go into. Okay, but first you need the main water, and then everything else could be attached to that. Make sense? Okay, that main water is 40 sa. Okay, so it's a measurement of 40 sa. Mystically they point out like 40 is typically the time that it takes for a child to develop. Like first level of development takes 40 days, and the idea is when you go to a mikvah, it's almost this notion of going under the water. It's like a rebirth of sorts, and so that's the idea behind the 40. One way or another, it has to be 40 sa of water, and then after that you could add all the drawn water you want. But if you didn't yet have 40 sa of mikvah water, and you start adding other water, it becomes invalid. The question is, what level of extra water invalidates the water before you hit 40 sa? Okay, so again, practically speaking, our mikvahs, if you go to any mikvah, what they did was they first brought the rainwater in. In Montreal, they used to actually use snow. They let snow fall in. They have a whole complex way of doing it, but basically allowing the snow, but they can't scoop the snow. The snow has to fall in, and then the snow melts. Fine, whatever it is. And then once you hit the 40 sa, then you can add all the water you want. But let's say you didn't yet add the 40 sa, and then you start adding drawn water, meaning pipe water, whatever it is, water from a bucket, then that invalidates. The question is, how much of that drawn water will invalidate the mikvah before you hit 40 sa? That's what they're going to be debating, okay? The idach, here's the other one. Hillel omer malehin mayim she'uvin poslin es ha-mikvah. A hin is a term you'll actually read in the Torah that is a measurement. If you have a hin of drawn water, a hin, by the way, is approximately 70, the equivalent of 72 eggs, large amounts. If you have drawn water of the measurements of a hin, that invalidates a mikvah. Again, before it's there 40 sa. Then the Gemara just parenthetically says, Shechayv Adam Lamar B'lashon Rabo. Why does he say hin? Hin is not a typical term that they would have used in the era that Hillel lived, because his Rebbe, his teacher, used the word hin in teaching the halacha, and therefore when you repeat something from your teacher, you should say in the exact terminology that they used. You should say it as they said it. Over here especially, as the commentators point out, because the whole rationale, where's this measurement hin come from? Why is he saying if it's this measurement, then it invalidates it? It's because hin is the smallest liquid measurement mentioned in the Torah, and therefore it demonstrates its significance. And therefore, he's saying that when you have a significant measurement of drawn water, that's when it invalidates the mikvah. And that's why they specifically quote his teacher over here saying hin, because it's not just a random measurement, it's specifically to tell you it's that amount, because that's an amount which is considered significant. Okay, Shammai Omer, Tisha Kabin. Shammai says no, not 1 hin, but rather 9 kabin of water. Once again, they say it's not like him, it's not like him. And what is the measurement? They quote listen to this. They say, Ajabo Beis Gardiim Mishara Ashba, until two weavers came from the dung gate. You can still visit the dung gate, right? We know the dung gate in Yerushalayim. It's one of the entrances to the old city. So there are two weavers who live by the dung gate, and they came along. Yerushalayim. They idu, and they testified mishum shmai vav talyon. They came along, meaning we didn't know what the measurement was, and they came along and they testified that they heard from Shmai and Avtalion, two of the great sages, sheshlosh shalugin ma'im shuvim poslam as a mikvah, that three lugin of water invalidate a mikvah, and the sages accepted their testimony. Why do we need to know, like, the fact that they were two weavers living in the dung gate? A weaver was not a very prestigious job. It was actually kind of like the lowest strata of society, and the dung gate was the cheapest. Now anywhere in Yerushalayim is a fortune, but the dung gate was the cheapest, like the lousiest place. It's called the dung gate. It was probably a smelly place. The bottom line, it was the worst place to live, and you have these two people. Imagine two people coming from like the worst neighborhood who had the worst job, and they come to Chamim like all filthy, and they're like, oh, we have a tradition. And the Chamim said, okay, and they accepted it. So it's like a beautiful thing that it highlights the fact that, it doesn't matter who you are, you're able to learn Torah from anyone. And basically the halacha is ruled based on these two people, these two anonymous people living in the abject poverty and whatever it is, their halacha is accepted, and we accept that tradition from them, that it's 3 lugin of water that invalidate a mikvah. Once you hit 40 sa, though, then you no longer invalidate it. The question next, yeah.
Curious, it's interesting that this is not a Hillel versus Shammai argument. There's
a third party in each of these.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Neither of them do we go
with,
and it's a third party in this.
Yeah. It is interesting, right? So it's right. In other words, these are not, although these are the examples of Shammai and Hillel, we have a third opinion or a fourth opinion in each of these, and we end up disregarding them either way. Yeah. Okay. V'idach. Last one. One introduction before we see this next halacha. We again, nowadays we don't really have many laws of purity and impurity. Historically, they would eat trumos, they would eat maestros. You have to be in a certain state of purity to be able to eat these things, okay? So what would happen, so you have the following scenario. So back in the day, because of that, a woman would check herself all the time. Like we have bedikas right now for the 7 days of cleanliness, after a woman has a period. But back in the day, they would check themselves more often, because if they had a period, if they became tmeah, then they would not be able to eat certain foods because of their status. So they would be checking themselves quite often. Nowadays, we don't do that. We don't do extra checkings, fine. But historically, they would check themselves often. And here you have the following question. Let's say a person does not check themselves, right, before eating truma. On the one hand, they have a chazaka. On the one hand, the status quo says that she is tahora, meaning the last time she checked herself on Monday, and Monday she was pure, right? So on the one hand, we have a notion of a status quo. What is that? What is the notion of a status quo? The notion of a status quo is that once we know something is true, then we could assume it's still true. In other words, is my house standing? My answer is yes, because I left my house 20 minutes ago, and it was standing. So the status quo is it's still standing. I mean, and I could say that definitively, my house is standing. I don't see it. I can't see it from here. Too bad, right? And I could say that my whatever that's a status quo. That's a chazak, and it has many ramifications in halacha about things that I know. Many different things that I know. However, there is also an inherent reasa. There is something which ruins the status quo over here, and that is that. Whereas my house, there is nothing which is causing my house to be destroyed, I hope. It's like, it's a house. Sorry? Amen. There you go. Thank you. Whatever. It's a house, right? So houses don't typically like implode, right? But when it comes to a status of being tahora, by definition, a woman cycles through, being tahora and then having a period. That's just what happens, right? So, in other words, it's not a typical status quo. You can't just say, well, my house was standing 30 days ago. I'm on a trip for 40 days. I could safely assume my house is probably standing. Of course, something could happen. Someone could drop something on the house and it could explode. Fine. But you wouldn't say the same thing when it comes to a cycle for a woman who is in, a certain age. Then yeah, by definition, yes, there was a status quo, but it's a status quo which constantly changes. And therefore, there's what we call a reasa. There's something which is upending that status quo, right? So there's a tension over here, how long we could go with the status quo, okay? So a woman it basically goes ahead and throughout, let's say, Monday was the last time she did a bedika. And then on Tuesday, she handled taharos, she handled items which are pure, right? And then Thursday, she does bedika and she sees that she is tameah. Right? What do we do with the tahora, the things that she handled on Tuesday, between the checking on Monday and the knowledge on Thursday? Did I say Thursday? Yeah, on Thursday. What does she do with the things she touched on Tuesday or Wednesday when it was in between. Do we go with that chazaka? There was that knowledge since she checked, we therefore know? Or do we say that no, since there's a reyes on this chazaka, there's something which upends this status quo, we therefore should treat the stuff she touched as tameya? That's the Gemara's question over here. That's the Gemara's discussion. Idach. Shammai Omer Kol Nashim Dayan Shaitan. Shammai over here takes the lenient approach. He says, Dayan Shaitan, from the time that she knows she's tameya, that's when it's tameh. We don't go retroactively whatsoever. If she checked herself on Thursday and that's when she saw blood, then anything she touched on Tuesday and Wednesday is tahora. V'hil Omer no. Mipkidal b'kida v'afil yamim harbe. Hill takes the stringent opinion. He says no. We only know she's tahora from the last checking. If let's say she checked on Monday, that's the only time we knew she was tahora. Anything after that, we don't know. Or if she checked only 2 weeks ago, and then she touched things for the past 2 weeks, too bad. They're all tameh because we only go from the last checking. Again, like Max pointed out, we have this opinion like neither of them. Lo k'divrei zeh v'lo k'divrei zeh. We don't go like any of them. Elami ace la ace. What does that mean? What that means is that you go 24 hours retroactively. That's what we do. Basically, we say on the one, because there's this tension. On the one hand, there's the status quo. On the other hand, we know that when there's a period that it doesn't have that upends the status quo. So Chachamim say you have a notion of 24 hours. In other words, here's the example. What that means is, let's say she did a checking on Monday, and then on Thursday she does a checking and she sees she's tameya. On Monday she was tahora, Thursday she was tameya. On Tuesday and Wednesday she touched things. So she touched things which were holy. So we say Chachamim say there's a 24-hour period that goes back. So meaning anything on Wednesday is going to be tameya, anything on Tuesday is going to be tahora. Right? That's what they say. 24 hours, that's how far. On the one hand, there's a status quo. On the other hand, we know that there's something which upends it. So whenever she does B'dika and she sees she's Tameya, we go back 24 hours and assume that she was Tameya for that time as well. But they also point out, if let's say she did a B'dika in the middle of that 24-hour period, let's say she did a B'dika on Wednesday afternoon, and it was Tahora, right? And she then on Thursday does a B'dika and it's Tameya, there's blood, then it can't override the B'dika. Then it stops at the Bekita, so it's only Wednesday afternoon, and on, that's Tameya, but it doesn't go a full 24 hours back. Yeah.
So anything that they're touched after the B'dika?
Correct. Anything she touches after the B'dika.
Okay. So if you're doing the B'dika, you're actually tar.
Yeah, the B'dika, but you only know from that moment and on. Meaning, keep in mind, what they would do is they would do B'dikas to even like after they would touch things to make sure that everything they just touched is Tahora. Right? The B'dika would work in almost like a retroactive fashion, not a forward fashion.
Right.
Okay. Ask the Gemara, wait a second, there's more cases. V'su Lake, are there not more cases? Those are the 3 cases. The Gemara says, no, there's more. Ve'ika hil omer lismoch, v'shamay omer shlo lismoch. So there's a discussion about there's certain karbanos that are brought on Yom Tov. And an animal is muktad Yom Tov. So there's a discussion about doing smicha. Smicha is the first step. We're about to start Sefer Vayikra. You'll see one of the first things you have to do in the karban, really the only thing the Yisrael does in a karban, the owner of the animal does, is they lean their hands. And it's a way of like giving up our averos on it, giving up ourselves onto the animal. So you lean your hands on it. It's a requirement of a karban. The problem is that if you bring certain karbanos are brought on Yom Tov, and you're not supposed to be putting pressure on an animal on Yom Tov. An animal is muktzah, certain animals. Now, if your pets, big discussion, but bottom line is, there's what to rely upon for your pets, but over here it's not your pet. Leaning on it would be asur on Yom Tov. Right? So are you allowed to do it? So Shammai says, Hillel says, you're allowed to do it. Shammai says, you're not allowed to do it. Now everyone agrees you have to smicha. Shammai says you have to do it before Yom Tov begins. Okay? In other words, Shammai says do it Erev Yom Tov. Hillel says no, you have to do it right before you bring the karban, and therefore he says to do it. So that's a machlokas. That should be number 4. There should be 4 things to debate. The Gemara says no. The reason this is not mentioned is because Shammai and Hillel's opinion is actually a machlokas by others as well. They're not the only ones who have this debate. Meaning there are many people who have this debate. Shammai and Hillel are amongst those who argue about this. We were talking, Rav Huna's list was 3 things that they exclusively argue about, not things that others argue about as well. Okay? Ask Gemara one more case. Habotzer lagas. So someone who we spoke about this earlier, and that is that in order for something to be susceptible to tuma, what do we say? How do you make something susceptible to tuma? Get wet. Excellent. Okay, it has to be, you have to pour liquid over something. Liquid has to pour over something, and it has to be liquid that you want to be on this thing. In other words, if you don't want this liquid to be on it, then it's not susceptible to tuma. But if you want liquid to be on it, in other words, let's say I have grapes and I wash those grapes, I want them clean, I just made them susceptible to tuma. But if let's say there's water in it and it's ruining it, it does not make it susceptible to tuma. So the question is, in the following case, the person takes harvest their grapes, and now there's juice that oozes out of the grapes. Right? So the juice itself, when it's sitting together in the baskets as a harvest thing, is that enough to make it hechsher is that enough to make it susceptible to tumah or not? Shammai points out that there are scenarios where I do want the liquid out of the grape. What are those scenarios where I want the liquid out of the grape? Making wine, right? So it's true. Sometimes I don't want the liquid. If I'm selling grapes, I don't care for the liquid. I want them to be nice and juicy and hard, like the Costco grapes. Okay, I want them to not have any juice